So the last section we're going to talk about today is reporting test results. As I've mentioned previously, all rating activity takes place on the CRRC online rating portal, and this is accessible to licensees, AITLs, test farms, and CRRC staff. So the permissions for that are going to vary depending on the user type. Where CRRC staff, we can basically see everything. We're kind of the super admin users, whereas test farms functionality is going to be built out later this year. Actually, right now it's very limited what they have available. And then licensees and AITLs have full functionality based on their kind of roles in the process. And this here is just an example of what the dashboard looks like when you log in. So this is something that, again, is going to be a station at the in-person training on July 10th. We're going to go into more detail about looking at all of the different stages of the application process and the different views that the users have. But again, I want to provide some information here today about our requirements regarding to reporting. So this flowchart provides an overview, a high-level overview of the application process, where an application starts as a draft submitted by the licensee or developed by the licensee. And then as soon as the licensee actually submits that draft application, it goes to the status initial pending results. And what that means is that the licensee has done their part. They are sending samples to an AITL, and the AITL needs to input data. So for the test labs that are on the line today, just keep in mind that the initial pending results is what you're looking for inputting. But then the application will go to initial application review, which is the CRRC queue. So that's where we are going to review the application, the information that the licensee submitted, and the information that the AITL submitted, to make sure that, again, all of the requirements were met, all the information is complete and accurate, the correct test methods were completed, and things like that. As soon as we complete our review, then we approve the initial results. And so what that means is if the licensee has already paid their rating fees, then the product will go straight to initial approved, which means that the initial values will be displayed on the rated products directory, and it'll move on through the process. If the licensee has not paid the application yet, it will go to the status pending payment. And so the results will not actually be displayed on the directory until it ends up in initial approved. So basically, this is just incentivizing the licensee to pay their rating fees so that they can actually get the values up there on the directory. Once the product is in that initial approved stage, as we saw back in the rating process, the AITL will have sent the specimens to the test farm for 3-year weathering. And it'll go through that 3-year process. After that is over, then we have a validation in the portal that will automatically send applications to this age pending results. It'll go back into the AITL queue to input the age data. So for those 3 years that the application is, or that the product is sitting at the test farm, there is not an application sitting in the AITL queue clogging that up. The goal is to only have things in the AITL queue that actually require attention and results. So just something to keep in mind, again, for those lab users on the line today. As soon as we receive the aged results, very similar to the initial results, the application will move into the CRRC review queue with that aged application review. We will complete our final review of all the information to make sure it is accurate and seems correct and the correct test methods were completed and all that good stuff. As soon as we go through that process, it will go to aged approved, which means that both the initial and the aged results will be displayed on the rated products directory. So again, just wanted to point out very explicitly here that the portion of this that the AITL, the Independent Test Lab, is responsible for is initial pending results and age pending results. If it's pending results, that means that the test lab needs to input data. So this is a screenshot. As opposed to going through a kind of interactive tutorial today, I am providing these screenshots again because we want to make sure that we are providing this information as an ongoing resource to you guys. But during the lab training, you will be able to see all of this in real time, and we'll actually have you guys input some data and see how that is and all that good stuff. So this is what, just a few things I wanted to point out specifically about the online rating portal. One of the fields that we get questions about is this test farm shipment date. So what we're asking for here is when the product specimens were sent from the test lab to the test farm. And when the test lab is inputting this information, they haven't actually sent the samples out yet. So what we're really asking for here is just an estimate. So you have your submittal date, and then you have a date that you expect for those specimens to go out, to be shipped out. So that's what we're looking for here. If that turns out to be vastly different, if there's some sort of delay either on the CRRC end or the licensee requests a delay for some reason, again, we do have that requirement that samples need to be sent out no less than 28 days before the next test farm placement date. But within that confine, there is some flexibility. So if you do need this date to be updated for some reason, CRRC staff can do that. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. We're just trying to get a feel for tracking the samples. If something were to happen, if they got lost in shipment, it's just helpful for us to have a general idea of when things are happening. So this is kind of the next section of an initial rating application. We're asking for pretty basic information here. The room temperature, relative humidity. Again, we do have that requirement that you need to verify the size requirements were met. This gray box is where the 5-point reflectance test data would go, which again is only required for certain product types. So just keep that in mind. Then of course we have a field for the solar reflectance and thermal emittance test methods that were used and the dates that they were completed. Also want to make sure that the correct air mass setting was used on the reflectometer. That device has several settings for the air mass, and so we want to make sure that the correct one was used because that will change the results a little bit. So again, Ronen will go into more detail about that during the training on July 10th. The only other thing I wanted to just note here is that we do have a specific date format where it is year, month, day. So I have highlighted that here. If you try to save results in a different format, it's not going to let you actually submit the test results. So just keep that in mind. This is the area of the application where you input the solar reflectance and thermal emittance data, arguably the most important information, both to the licensee and to consumers. So, excuse me, keep in mind that solar reflectance, you want to report to 3 decimal places, and thermal emittance needs to go to 2 decimal places. And that's a function of the precision of the devices and kind of our rounding practices to make sure that there's no confusion there. I also wanted to note that there is this red asterisk here just for the first solar reflectance and thermal emittance measurement. And the reason for that is because if you're using test method 1, which again is for variegated products and tile products, wood products, you actually just report the final average value. So we do have it set up to just accept 1 value for those cases, but in most cases, you are going to be inputting information for all 9 fields here. The last thing I want to mention here, well, second to last thing I want to mention here is that you need to be careful when you're inputting this data not to use your mouse scroll feature because it will actually cause the values to change up or down based on the way that you're scrolling. And that's just if you're clicked in one of these cells. So make sure after you input the data, click away and then scroll down. Otherwise, you risk actually changing the value that's in here and it not being accurate. So just keep that in mind as well. And lastly, wanted to mention that you want to match the licensee labeling. So when you receive the specimens from the licensee, they will have labeled them somehow. So please make sure to label appropriately. This is important because we do require photos with these specimens. So trying to track, which specimen corresponds to which photo. And also when the samples go to the test farm, we need to know which specimen is going to Arizona, Ohio, or Florida, because we do track, where they end up and how they weather at each location. Oh, one more note. The average solar reflectance at thermal moments is calculated by the portal based on the user inputs up here. So no math is required on your part. So we talked about thickness testing a little bit earlier in the webinar today. Wanted to show you what that looks like in the portal. It's kind of smart that it will only show this section if it's required, so that is helpful. Again, it's for coatings and single ply products. So the recommended thickness in dry foam thickness in mils is going to be shown here. That is based on licensees' input. So they will have provided that information when they filled out the application. And then the portal calculates what that 20% tolerance range is going to be here. In this case, it's 16 mils to 24 mils. And you select the test method and date tested. Again, here are the 5 measurements, the 5 fields for the 5 measurements on each specimen. It has to meet the tolerance, the 20% tolerance, to be able to submit the application. If you test the product, and let's say you had tested this specific panel and you had gotten a batch average of 30 mils, let's just say, that would be outside the 20% tolerance, and the AITL would be responsible for reaching out to the licensee, letting them know that what they received was not prepared per the specification, and getting new specimens. Sometimes the test lab will actually prepare the panels themselves, and that would mean that they prepared the panels incorrectly and they should do it again. But sometimes the licensee will actually provide the panels already prepared in the case of coatings, and there was just some sort of error. Also, sometimes the licensee will actually input this incorrectly. So it's really important that this matches and we can catch any potential errors like that. Okay, so this is the 5-point reflectance test. I pointed that out in an earlier slide. It's this gray box. It should look familiar based on the description from earlier in this session. There's a space for those 5 measurements that you're going to complete on a diagonal, evenly spaced on the specimen to determine variegation. And we see that in the case of this product, it is variegated. Its average is 0.25, and there is a measurement 5, that was 0.34. We also have a measurement number 4 that was 0.19. And so both of those are 0.05 away from the straight average of the 5 measurements. So the product is considered variegated. And I wanted to point out here that this gold text that you're seeing down here is actually not an error. I think that it's common to think, when we see color and text like that, oh, it's an error and something has been input incorrectly. But really, it's just trying to provide direction to the lab user that, hey, heads up, this is variegated. Make sure that you're using the correct solar reflectance test method to account for that. Another kind of one-off special thing that's going to happen for certain products is this color family information is going to appear. Again, this section of the application is only visible when it is relevant, which is helpful. So you won't do any work unnecessarily if you're the test lab. What this does is it pulls information, again, that the licensee has provided on the application regarding the color family and also the material type. And based on the licensee's selection, it provides the Hunter LAB range values for that color family. So in the case of dark blue, we would expect to see an L, an A, and a B range as shown here. For example, the L range would be 13 to 35, the A -7 to +6, and so on. We also have a solar reflectance and thermal emittance that is assigned for that color family group. Again, don't want to get into too much detail about this because this is just kind of specific to certain product types and just the color family program in general. There are some kind of special rules there. So that's just what this information is showing here. If you have more questions, of course, feel free to ask. And then this information here is where the lab is actually going to input data. So this gray box, it restates the requirements of E805 Section 9, which is a 045 geometry with a 10-degree observer and a D65 light source, and also, of course, the Hunter LAB color space. So when I was talking about the L range and the A range and the B range, if I lost you guys, don't fret. We are going to talk about we're actually going to have a representative from Hunter Lab at the lab training on July 10th, and he's going to talk a little bit about what the Hunter color space is and how to take those measurements and things like that. But for now, just know that if you're reporting results, all you have to do as the lab user is make sure you are complying with the measurement requirements here and inputting the actual L range, A range, and B range coordinate measurements that you get from your colorimeter. And it will provide either this little green check mark and text that says the color properties are within the allowable range. That's referring to the ranges up above. Or if it is outside of that range, it will be another, it will provide an error message. And again, you would need to follow up with the licensee and say, hey, you know, I think that this might have been classified in the incorrect color family. You know, what's going on here? So just wanted to, you know, mention again here, if the AITL is unable to test color at the conditions shown here, this is one of the few cases where the licensee can actually provide us with results, because most licensees actually do have the capability to test for color, and because it is a test that not every AITL offers, we do allow for licensees to provide this information to the test lab to input. Also, this note here at the bottom, it is an automatic validation based on the user's input here. So in terms of submitting your results, once you have input all that information that I've just shown, you can save data and return to it as needed until you actually hit the submit button. So if you are not completely done, just make sure you hit that save button, and you can always come back to an application. Also, don't forget to add documents where needed. We do have this document section at the end of the at the bottom of the application, and you would just select the files one at a time. Right now, we are hoping to have a multi-file upload functionality coming soon, but for now, just one at a time. Select your files. As I have alluded to, photos of specimens are required. We do have the specific set of requirements in Appendix 5 of the CRRC 1 program manual. And basically those requirements are just regarding making sure that the photo is clear and not blurry, good lighting. You can actually see the specimens. There are some nomenclature requirements for the files that you need to adhere to. and just little things like that. We just want to make sure that we are actually able to see the specimens and understand, what product it is and see any potential issues. Also, some tests require reporting tools, for example, test method number 1 and the tile template method. So just keep that in mind as well. We do require a copy of those so that we can, again, validate the information against what's actually been input into the portal, making sure there's no typos and things like that. In terms of the submission itself, the responsible person at the laboratory has to be the one to digitally sign the submission. So we understand that a lot of laboratories have multiple users with access to the portal and are inputting the test results and things like that. But we just want to make sure that someone who has been to a CRRC lab training is the last set of eyes to look at this data and make sure that it looks correct and help cut down on potential errors, and CRRC having to go back to the lab with questions. So keep that in mind when you're ready to hit the submit button. As the laboratory, it will come up with this pop-up that says, are you sure you want to submit these results? Once you submit them, you are not going to be able to go back and change anything. Of course, you can reach out to CRRC staff and we can kind of manipulate things on our end, but it kind of leaves your queue as soon as you hit the submit button. And you will have to input your name and your account password, so the password that you actually use to log into the online rating portal. So make sure you keep that handy somewhere because you will have to use it. I wanted to give a little bit of information about one of the few paper forms that we still utilize. It's called the test farm notification form. It's also called the F7. If you are fond of alphanumeric identifiers, the licensee is responsible for completing the top portion of this document and sending it to the AITL along with the specimens. So before the age testing or the initial testing, even happens, when the licensee is checking they need to fill out some basic information in terms of their contact information, information about the product, and whether the product is low slope, steep slope, or both. This is really important information for the test farm. And again, instead of sending this to the test farm directly and then the test farm not being sure which samples it goes with or anything like that, this form travels with the test specimens kind of through the lifetime of the specimens. So once the AITL gets the form and the specimens, then they will just send it on to the test farm. They're not actually responsible for completing anything on this form. They're just kind of ushering it through to the test farm. There may be cases where the licensee has not done their due diligence. They have not filled out the top part of the form. In that case, you as the AITL are required to make sure that that is submitted. So that's either contacting the licensee and asking them to provide it, or filling out the information based on your knowledge. But obviously, you'd want to check with the licensee to make sure the information is correct. So again, once the initial testing is completed, the specimens are packaged back up and sent with this form to the test farm for the 3-year weathering period. And then the test farm is the one who's actually responsible for completing the bottom portion of this F7 form. And they keep that on file. They send a copy to the CRRC. They also send a copy to the licensee. And this form, again, because it travels with the specimens, it will go with the specimens after aging to the AITL. And what's helpful about this is that, again, as I mentioned, there will be labels on each of the specimens, and that will help us know which specimens were in each exposure area, because the results will differ based on that. And there is a specific reporting requirement for age results. So I'll get to that momentarily, but just wanted to point out that this is a really important form, and it does require input from kind of all sides, the licensee, the test lab, and the test farm. So it's kind of a collaborative document, really important. Don't want to forget it. So now that we've talked about initial testing, I want to talk a little bit about age testing. It is similar to initial testing, but some tests are not required, so it makes it a little bit easier, a little bit faster. You don't have to do thickness testing, and you don't have to do colorimetry testing. You also don't have to do the 5-point reflectance test again if you've already had to do it once, because you've already figured out if the product is variegated or not. So keep in mind that you should be doing the most up-to-date test method. So if a new test method has been released over the period of the 3-year weathering, you might be doing a different test method than you did it for initial testing, but for the most part, it's going to be the same. So that's kind of helpful and hopefully makes the age testing go a little bit faster. The fields are very similar, as you can see: temperature, humidity, test method, and date. Also, we've got our 9 fields for solar reflectance and thermal emittance. Again, I have here the Group A, Group B, and Group C labels. That corresponds to the different climate zones that the product was actually weathered in. So super important that the results actually get input here. As you can see in this example, for the case of this product, for the hot humid exposure, it had the highest reflectance. In cold temperate, it weathered a little bit differently, and the solar reflectance results are a little bit lower. And for the hot dry, the solar reflectance values are actually the lowest. So this is not necessarily indicative of what we would actually see for a product. This is just dummy data that I put in, but just keep in mind that the results will differ based on the climate zone. So it is really important, again, to correlate the specimens to that test farm notification F7 form so that we have the correct data. So, yep, just reiterating that point. Okay, so the other type of testing and reporting that test labs participate in is random testing. I talked a little bit about that the random testing program in general earlier in this presentation, so I won't kind of rehash that, but basically the point of the random testing program is to verify the accuracy of the data in the rated products directory. So as I mentioned, we send samples to all of our AITLs, just kind of as they are available and based on who we've sent the package to last and things like that. And then the results are going to be reported also via PDF form. So this is another place where we do still have the paper forms, but it should be handled as if you're completing initial testing for a licensee, taken with kind of the same seriousness, same requirements and all of that. It's just that the reporting vehicle is a little bit different. We also require that you hold the samples for 30 days following completion of testing. Again, these are obviously not going to the test farm. We're just comparing, the results that you have gotten from the random testing to the initial results that are on the rated products directory. Another thing that is a little bit interesting about the random testing program is because we are trying to really replicate the conditions of initial testing to get the rating that is existing on the directory, samples are tested with the same test method that was used to actually get the product rating. So, earlier I mentioned that for age testing, you might actually be using a different solar reflectance or thermal emittance test based on changes that have happened over the 3-year period of weathering. But in the case of random testing, we are keeping that test method uniform regardless of changes. So in terms of the passing and failing criteria, if the random testing results are within plus or minus 0.05 of the initial results, is considered to pass. For thermal emittance, It's also 0.05 for products with a thermal emittance of less than 0.3. But for products with a higher thermal emittance, the threshold is actually plus or minus 0.1, so 10 points of emittance in either direction of the initial ratings. And that, again, is based on some work that was done by one of our technical working groups, excuse me, which, again, I'm responsible for managing, and they actually did some statistical work and some modeling and found that the 0.1 was more appropriate for products with a higher thermal emittance. So here we have an example of the random testing results report. Again, a paper form. This one's alphanumeric identifier is F14. This form is going to get a little bit of a facelift next year because verification testing was a program related to Energy Star, which is not going to be happening anymore. So there's going to be a few formatting changes, but basically the form is going to continue to ask for the same information. This top portion is actually filled out by the CRRC, except for the lab report ID, of course, and provided to the AITL, so you don't have to input, you know, all that basic information. We've already got that covered for you. And then we have kind of the bottom half of the file here, where you actually, you'll notice very similar to the online rating portal, where we're asking for the temperature and humidity and the air mass of 1.5. Then also you're going to input the solar reflectance and thermal emittance. I will note that the amount of specimens that you are sent for random testing is a little bit different than what is sent for initial testing. So that's why there's only these 3 trials here, as opposed to having 9 fields to fill out. So just keep that in mind. Also, you want to check the test method that you conduct. But again, actually, we, the CRRC, provide you with that test method. When we send you this form, that will already be checked for you so that you know which method to complete. But you will have to input the date and sign the form. Addendums for random testing. The first is an addendum for specifically for field applied coatings and single ply. This is just required for those 2 product types, nothing else. And what this does is it tells us some information about, for coatings, how the panel was prepared by the lab, because usually what we receive is pints of liquid coating. They're not already applied to a metal substrate, so that's something that the lab has to do. So we want to make sure that those are prepared properly. And then also lower on the form, you actually input the thickness measurements to, again, make sure it meets the 20% tolerance. So just the important thing to point out here is that for, again, coating products, we request that you provide the method of application, the mixing time, and the method of mixing. Once you've completed that top portion, then you also want to provide us with the number of coats applied, again, just for field applied coatings. We also provide you with the application instructions, so you know how many coats to apply. So we're just making sure, again, that the manufacturer instructions were followed. And then actually providing us with the dry film mill thickness, taken at 5 evenly spaced points, just like you would do for an initial rating. That is for both coating and single ply, excuse me. And then indicate the test that was completed and the date based on the product type. For coatings, it can be ASTM D1005 or D7091. For single ply, it's going to be D751. This here is the other random testing addendum form that we have, the F14B. This is specifically for tile products that were initially tested via ASTM C1549. So if you'll remember from our slide about the test method requirements, There is a specific method called the tile test method number 1, which is a variation of test method number 1. And then there's also the tile template method. So we have these 2 methods that are specific for tile, but that wasn't always the case. In the past, tile was rated using ASTM C1549. The problem with that is it only takes 3 measurements. So for the case of some tile products, it's hard to convene on an average with just 3 measurements. So we've created for tile products that were initially tested this way, this addendum where you're actually taking 3 measurements, as is the case for C1549, but you're doing that on each of 9 specimens. So you're not taking the full 54 measurements that are required by the new tile test methods, but you are taking a few more to feel like a little bit more confident in the average that you're going to get specifically for the solar reflectance. So that's just what we're seeing here with this addendum. Again, CRRC staff is responsible for providing this form and letting you know when this is what needs to be completed.